19th Amendment was not passed by Morgan Ladyman. The 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution gave women the right to vote. However, this amendment was not passed without the fighting of many women in the United States. Who was involved in fighting for the passing? All of the women of the United States had been fighting for rights for many years leading up to this event, but the main women involved were Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Lucretia Mott. These were the women rights leaders that all the women of the United States looked up to. One of the main women rights leaders at this time was Susan B. Anthony. She was the woman who wrote the petition to Congress saying that women should have the right to vote. Many women looked up to her during this time of struggle because she gave them hope that the amendment would be passed. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was another main women rights leader. The Seneca Falls Convention in New York would not have been made possible without this leading lady. Lucretia Mott also helped set up the Seneca Falls Convention in New York. On July 19th and 20th of the year 1848, the Seneca Falls Convention was held in New York to discuss the social, civil, and religious condition and rights of women. The National American Women's Suffrage Association was made by the joining of two former groups, the National Women's Suffrage Association and the American Women's Suffrage Association. These groups were both founded in 1869. They pursued the right to vote in different ways, but by 1890 it became necessary to combine the efforts to keep the cause alive. This newly formed organization became the most mainstream and nationally visible pro-suffrage group. The main mission of this group was to push for suffrage at the state level, believing that state-by-state support would eventually force the federal government to pass the amendment. After many years of struggle, the 19th Amendment was finally passed on June 4th, 1919, with a two-thirds required majority vote in the Senate. The amendment was then sent to the states for ratification. Here's the first discussion question of the presentation. Do you think that women fought hard enough to gain the right to vote? Why or why not? Imagine this. On June 4th of the year 1919, Congress does not pass the 19th Amendment. All of the hard work of the women's rights leaders has just been proved completely worthless. The amendment obviously was passed because of the ways that the women fought for themselves. But however, think of this. If the 19th Amendment to the Constitution was not passed, everyone in the country, especially the women who fought so hard, would be in shock. When a huge event is changed, there are obviously outcomes that happen right there on the spot. When the 19th Amendment does not receive the amount of votes that is needed to pass it, what changed right at that moment? Women are in distress. After working this hard to finally gain enough respect to be granted the right to vote, their dreams are crushed once again when the amendment is not passed. Changes have obviously occurred because at one moment, women are nearly seconds away from being granted voting rights, and now their wish was declined. They are fighting back. This moment is critical because whatever they choose to do now will affect them in the long run. If they choose to keep fighting for their rights, they might never get them. However, if they choose to give up now, there's no way that they will ever get their rights granted to them. So what do you think the women decide to do? Women soon begin to riot because they have to let their emotions out some way and somehow. Here is discussion question number 2. What would you do if you were Susan B. Anthony and you were just told that the amendment was not ratified? How would you react? With the 19th Amendment not being passed, there are short-term effects that come along with it. These two effects are riots and the 1920 presidential election. Right after the 19th Amendment was not ratified, attention soon spread to right outside the Congress building where women were rioting for the 19th Amendment not being passed. Leading the riots was Susan B. Anthony, one of the women rights leaders. Men were shocked at how strongly the women were pushing to gain this right of suffrage. However, they were very intimidated by the women. All this time, the men had power over the women in many areas of society. With women getting the right to vote, many new doors would be open to them, including jobs, which very intimidated the men because the women could take the jobs from them. The time has rolled around to the 1920 president election. Women have not stood down to try to achieve their rights to vote, but so far, no luck. The main people running for election are James M. Cox and Warren Harding. The women really want to vote because they feel as if they have a right to choose who is leading their country, but Congress still refuses to pass the amendment. When the 19th Amendment was passed and ratified in real life, voting numbers reached a high of over 8 million more than the previous year. The women's votes actually affected the outcome of the election since the amendment was passed. Warren Harding ended up winning this election, but would he have won if women had not been allowed the right to vote? Odds are, both his numbers would have gone down equally, but you never know. Perhaps Harding took advantage of this, being the first presidential election that women were able to vote in, and wanted to have them be on his side, so that would make his numbers raise quite a bit. After the 9/11 attacks, security moms concerned about terrorism were courted by both parties and credited for fueling George W. Bush's victory in 2004, in which he got a higher percentage of women's votes than any Republican presidential candidate since his father. Try to imagine not having George W. Bush as a president. Without women getting the right to vote on that day in Congress in 1919, George W. Bush probably wouldn't have won the election of 2004. If George W. Bush were never president, Saddam Hussein would not have been captured. If someone else had been president, how would they have handled the 9/11 attacks? All of these things would be changed if women were not given the right to vote on that day in Congress. Discussion question number 3. How much do you think women voting affects the outcome of presidential elections? The long-term effects of the 19th Amendment not being passed. Although the 19th Amendment's main purpose was to give women the right to vote, there were many new opportunities that were also open for them with the passing of this amendment. Without the passing of the 19th Amendment, there is no way women could get jobs in small local factories. Better yet, people definitely would not see them as a news reporter on their television screen or even as a political position in their government. Many women do not understand that all of the rights that they were given all started with the passing of this amendment. Without the passing of this amendment, women would not be allowed to walk alone on the streets, go shopping in a mall, or even go to school. Before the 19th Amendment, women were looked down upon by men. Today and age, women are seen everywhere. This was able to happen because they fought for their rights hard enough to gain the right to vote, and that is what showed the people, especially the men, that even though they were of a different sex, they still had the right to be treated as humans. Although women are still looked down upon, they are treated a lot better than they were back in the 1800s. Of course, there are always going to be rumors that girls are not as strong as boys and girls cannot throw a ball as far. But looking at the situation, if women were able to attain the right to vote, then why can't they fight for the fact that they should not be looked at any different than men, even if that does include who is stronger or more athletic?